Hey all, welcome back. I know I said I wasn't going to be doing a video on the Pillow Book, but I meant in November, and it's December now, and I've spent 6 weeks with this Heian-era Japanese court woman, Sei Shonagon, Shōnagon, who I think has another speculative name. We don't know her real name for sure, but this is almost more like a title and family name sort of thing. But I've just gotten in my head to calling her Sei, and she's really become a friend over these past 6 weeks that I've been reading this book pretty much always before bed, just a little bit every night. And it's not a long book to get through, but it's one you do really want to take your time with. And it's just this collection of anecdotes and lists and essays and thoughts about all sorts of things: nature, court life, men, the way lovers try to hide their goings on, just all sorts of things, stories, sometimes incomplete or random stories. It's just this book of vignettes but also it's not quite a diary because it's all out of order. It's all completely out of order, and while it could be seen as random, our brains, I speculate there is some thought to the construction of it. There are certain arcs and the ways that things seem to be placed in a sort of sense, even though it's not chronological or categorical. But it could just be our human brains too, having a way of sort of finding patterns and things that we're so good at doing, which is what actually makes these sort of vignette type books so amazing to me. And one of my favorites is because that everybody reading them is going to find their own patterns and their own significant things that are going to jump out to you on any given reading or where you're at in life, so if that's all you want to know just to get you excited about reading this before hearing my thoughts, I'm going to be doing this video talking about, again, like all my favorite parts and stuff, and then at the end of the video sharing some of my plans for future reading for the coming months. Could be even the next year for all I know. I'm no longer sort of really putting any time pressure on myself to get stuff read. And then also sharing a cool Japanese art book I picked up at a used store recently. So that'll be at the end of the video. But you only get a chance to express your own original thoughts about a book once. And so I've specifically avoided, listening to what, for the most part, other people have to say about this book, except what's in like the notes in the back and the introduction and stuff. And I really, want to just talk about my own interpretation of it. And so if that sort of thing interests you, definitely read the book before listening to my takes and what I found interesting. And it's, in my opinion, the more the merrier with these videos on YouTube. If somebody has made a video about a book, or I've made a video about a book that you would like to write about or like make a video on, it's like, yeah, the more people talking about and making content about these books, the better, in my opinion. So it's not even just that they're great books, even though I gravitate toward the classics and stuff written in history, because there's a reason for this. It's because these books remind us that we're not alone in time. We take this for granted so often because, time is such a human construct, right? Even language, you could argue some animals have, a lot of animals have a type of language, or even insects, a form of communicating with each other. But like time, that's a real human construct, right? And it's one we often take for granted, just to know that there were lives that happened before us. The only way we know this is through like writing and people's memory and oral storytelling and vestiges of the past and it's like we can't take like history for granted, and that's why there is really, to me, almost no distinction in my mind between history and literature. It's all the same interest. So a bit of a tangent, but like, I feel that this is an important thing that the Pillow Book is helping me to articulate for the first time. This idea that we can't take this understanding that we are not, it's tempting to think of oneself as the center of the universe, but the more you learn about other lives and how big this world is, and how not only do we exist in space, but there's these many lives that have lived centuries and years before us and will after us, and it makes you feel small, and there's this sort of curve where that's terrifying, maybe, I guess, when you're younger, or just sort of realizing it for the first time, but then you come to the other side of that curve, and the smaller you feel, the more comforting it actually is. It's like none of us are the center of the universe because all of us are, sort of thing. I don't know, that made no sense. But the Pillow Book, right? Let's go back to my notes to stay on track here. So this version is based on what is called the Shōnagon text. I can't read my own handwriting. And I've also been listening to an audio version translated by Ivan Morris, which is the Shōnagon. Those versions are pretty similar. They're in the sections are in almost the same order, with a few that the Shōnagon includes that the Sankanban omits. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And then there are other versions that actually are categorized by sort of parts. I much prefer this sort of scattered vignette version. I know I wouldn't enjoy as much a categorized version of this. So either way, both of those translations sound great. I think this Penguin edition is fantastic because of all the notes at the back and things that are helping out. So I guess I should just start talking about the sections. Sei Shonagon is clearly a very different person than I am, and in so many ways just saw the world in such a different way, the minutia of everything, and all this will come out clearer as kind of I'm talking, but I'm so fascinated by it and so astounded. It's a book where you really feel, as you read it, the personality of this woman coming off the page and becoming almost more complete and real than many people you even know in your own life. And that's like reading someone else's thoughts to this extent, and thoughts that a lot of people just don't even want to say out loud, either in her time or ours. She really just writes without thinking that. It does seem that she thinks that no one ever is going to read this, but there will be kind of a twist to that as we go on. So, it's a woman who fixes her mind upon the mundane, delightful things, irritating things, rarely upon the heavy and the profound, almost willfully, almost intentionally. And there is a kind of reference to this, which I think we'll get to a bit later, but I'll just kind of start going through sections I found particularly interesting, or that I have something to say about them, just in typical improvised Mike Reads the World fashion. So I guess I'll start with number 4, because it's a recurring theme where it breaks my heart to think of parents sending a beloved son into the priesthood. Poor priests, they're not the unfeeling lumps of wood that people take them for. They're despised for eating that dreadful monastic food, and their sleeping arrangements are no better. There's a little bit more, but this kind of theme where she sort of almost has a bit of a condescending attitude toward priests and monks and sort of the Buddhist religious thing in general, but she also has this she also really enjoys the pilgrimages, which we'll get to, because it's one of kind of the only times that she can get out and see see some new things and see the world, because this is a very cloistered life that she lives. Even in transport, she, with these other ladies, she's in these carriages that have the blinds down, and it's this it's just such a secluded sort of life. Or when men come to visit, she's speaking to them from behind screens, sort of thing. And but in part of this, I think, is why all of the sort of minutia of life comes out through her, right? Like, she's just so attuned to all of the little details of life, because it's such sort of a confined experience that she's in. At least that's one kind of theory I could have. But and then there's this story about sort of a dog that I found kind of touching, that a dog chases the emperor's cat, gets beaten and thrown out of the palace, and then it comes back, and Sei Shonagon says his name, and he starts crying, and she and the other women, including the empress, are kind of like amazed at how this dog is showing human emotion. I just found it to be a touching story, and one that really, it's the first one in this book, number 6, this dog Okinamaru, that really grabbed me and made me realize, this is something kind of special. And then number 10 through 19, we get kind of our first set of lists of mountains, markets, peaks, plains, river pools, bodies of water. She just makes lists of names of places and things. They're just lists. That's all there is to it. I don't think there's any other thing to read into them. They're just almost there. And again, if I think of this as a world that I'm getting immersed in, just sort of, you just imagine somebody, and I've done this in my own notebooks, just making lists of interesting things that, my favorites of this or that, or whatever. Yeah, it's just relatable. I mean, number 20, the sliding panels that close off the northeast corner of this hall are painted with scenes of rough seas and terrifying creatures with long arms and legs. A lot of this I just don't have much to say about. They're just images that have stayed with me, and I've written them. I've made my own list of the chapters, I guess you could call them, or sections, the vignettes that have most stood out to me. I made my own list in my own book. So, but again, it really is. It's like reading a diary, I suppose, like someone's journal. But again, the way that it's all kind of out of order and very selectively focuses on the mundane, the delightful things, the irritating things, but all the mundane things, right, is sort of like willfully, is sort of the opposite of the way some people journal, right? And when I journal, sometimes it can be very weighty and this is a whole new, just a mind-blowing thing to me, and really good for me too, to enter into my own mind, into this whole world of life, of minutia and details, and appreciating little things, which I always in theory say is a good thing to do, but in practice, do I really do it? Reading this book kind of makes me realize no, I don't really do it. 27 things that make you feel nostalgic. A dried sprig of aoi, I don't know. Things children use in doll play. Coming across a torn scrap of lavender or grape-colored fabric crumpled between the pages of a bound book. On a rainy day when time hangs heavy, searching out an old letter that touched you deeply at the time you received it. Last year's summer fan. All things that make us nostalgic, or at least evoke, even if you've never experienced that exact thing. Last year's summer fan. Number 37, just a bunch of trees. We're writing about a bunch of trees. It's like an essay about trees. And Number 34 is flowering trees. Number 35 is ponds. And these are almost just like little nature sketches, something like, almost like Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac is kind of what it makes me think of. Number 46, we meet, I had kind of initially thought I would talk more about these characters, but I don't think I will too much. Secretary Controller Yukinari is kind of the first, and this is hard, it's the first man that, in the book that Sei Shonagon really kind of seems awed with or impressed with or possibly likes. It can be kind of hard to parse out her exact level of romantic or passionate engagement with some of the men she admires or talks about, because there's, like with Secretary Controller Yukinari, she clearly has this sort of flirtatious, but more toward the friendship side of things. Like, it's like a friendship, but it's slightly flirtatious. And there's never an explicit mention of Sei Shonagon having an affair with somebody. She doesn't write about any intimacy that she has, but there are plenty of passages that make us realize that clearly she knows about it. Like, clearly she has her affairs. Clearly she has her boyfriends. Because she writes so much about how men should and shouldn't handle those situations, and what is irritating and not irritating to a woman about how they handle those situations. So she knows about it, but yeah, it's never clear to me exactly who her lovers are and who are just her friends. Yukinari might be a friend. He's mentioned later in the book too, but I also get the sense when he's mentioned in a later part of the book that perhaps there was a romantic engagement. And in fact, there is a BBC version of the Pillow Book as an audio series or whatever that's it's adapted into like a crime drama, and it uses a lot of passages from the Pillow Book, but it's actually, it takes a lot of liberties from the little, maybe I'll talk about that at the end if I feel like I haven't gone on too long, but yeah. So number 46, yeah, we get her thoughts on Yukinari, that's where I was, and in a nice exchange. I won't ruin it for you if you haven't read it. Number 63, 64, let's jump to there. Plants, flowering plants, more nature essays. Number 68, things that can't be compared. Summer and winter, night and day. I'm going to skip down. The noisy commotion when crows roosting together are suddenly disturbed by something during the night. The way they tumble off their perches and flap awkwardly about from branch to branch, squawking sleepily, make them seem utterly different from daytime crows. And this is interesting because there's actually this whole paragraph here of sort of just things that are just opposites. They're not things that can't be compared, they're just opposites, right? So I don't know if that's a translation thing. But then the last one is actually like just now we're talking about crows. Now we just get a poetic paragraph about crows. That's very indicative of, or to me, like very characteristic of, Sei Shonagon's writing and the way her mind works, is that she'll kind of she'll write on a tangent and then kind of just take a lateral turn. Her mind is kind of funny and hard to, I don't know if it's clever or just hard to follow, but it's intriguing and charismatic nonetheless, especially because she stays in the realm of sort of mundane things, and it's kind of her mind in some ways that makes them more interesting than they really are, or that they would otherwise be to me. And that's, I guess, part of the magic of what she does. Yeah. 77, we get another man, Tarunobu. Taronabu, who's going to make some recurrences. He kind of starts we get our first impression of him isn't great because he's kind of spreading like bad rumors around about Sei Shonagon, and it isn't like entirely clear to me what these baseless and ridiculous rumors are. And there's certainly a lot of people. Actually, this is a great time to mention what the Lady Murasaki, the writer of The Tale of Genji, which I also would like to read in the coming months now that I have read Sei Shonagon, but Lady Murasaki actually wrote in her diary about our Sei Shonagon, and I think this is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to read it. I just got this from a website, which I should probably cite, but won't. So Sei and Lady Murasaki were actually rival consorts of the same empress, according to this website. And what Lady Murasaki wrote is, Lady Sei Shonagon, a very proud person. She values herself highly and scatters her Chinese writings all about. Yet should we study her closely, we should find that she is still imperfect. She tries to be exceptional, but naturally persons of that sort give offense. She is piling up trouble for her future. One who is too richly gifted, who indulges too much in emotions, even when she ought to be reserved, and cannot turn aside from anything she is interested in spite of herself, will lose self-control. How can such a vain and reckless person end her days happily? So kind of scathing, and really we don't know the answer to that last question. We don't know, there's no mention of Sei Shonagon after the year 1017, and we don't really know how she ended her life. There's a couple thoughts of how some say she got remarried, or married for the first time, and we actually don't know if she was ever married. And then others say she became a Buddhist nun, so yeah, who knows, but what is really interesting there to tie this into, like, apparently there were several times when people had negative opinions of, say, Shōnagon, which is, it's really interesting because I wonder if it kind of makes me think, and some of the things she writes make me think this too, that she was just as kind of forward and prone to expressing thoughts that maybe others wouldn't say out loud as she is in her writing. And I do really get the sense from this that even in her writing, her insecurities are clear. She has a lot of insecurities, but she also doesn't shy away from criticizing other people. And she's just a complicated, flawed person who put really the way she was onto a page, even if she wasn't the most profound or intellectual person, but just like, yeah, and I feel like the BBC audio drama that I was listening to, really, the actress really kind of is on point with the way I imagined her personality as this sort of like shy, or not shy, sorry, I did that wrong, clever, but not intellectual, and soft-spoken but not shy. Like somebody who's just kind of just will say matter-of-factly and soft-spoken what they're thinking, and that could come off as, to some people, very arrogant. But there is definitely a lot, there are moments in this book where she becomes vulnerable, so I'll continue going through them. Wow, there's also this mention of a man named Narimitsu, I think it is, who in the footnotes actually says is thought to perhaps have been her first husband, and they divorced when she went to court to serve, and that potentially she had a child by him. So again, but in the court they talk to each other more, and they're referred to more as if they are brother and sister, to make it even more confusing. And she kind of like pisses him off on purpose, because he's like, you know, if a woman wants to break up with me, they should just send me poetry because I don't care about poetry. So she writes him a poem and sends it to him. So there's this sort of like slightly antagonistic relationship between them, which, and again, like reading this multiple times, there's so much more to wonder about, to think into, and to learn like what people might have uncovered and to think about what might have been, but to try to think about what and read between the lines and figure out what's really happening behind these words is just, even if we can never really know the truth is one of the greatest delights of reading that there is, I think. Yeah, so then we get the number 82, the Snow Mountain episode. I love this so much because it's just a delightful story, and it's very frivolous, and it's like it's really kind of, the Empress almost does something really petty to win a competition, but I still get the sense that this is being written of in like a nostalgic way, where Sei Shonagon basically bets that this mountain of snow is going to stay until a certain week in the first month of the year, and yeah, that's just a delightful one. And now I'm using the word delightful so much because that's how she is often translated and kind of how she writes. That's one thing I'll say. The Ivan Morris whatever translation makes a point to say that Sei Shonagon's writing is often quite repetitive, like using the same word many times subsequently. That doesn't come off quite as good in English as it would in Japanese, but that the Ivan Morris translation really tries to I think does a better job of actually capturing that repetition. So this is one of those books where if you really love it, like it's worth, I think, getting multiple translations. And if I ever one day would learn Japanese, it would like literally be just to read this book, but I think that would be where I really just want to start learning languages to read some of these things in the original language. Like that's kind of where I'm at. Still working on Ovid in Latin. That is a real challenge and very slow, but wow, is it worth it? And like Persian for Attar, like, oh, I could go on. What would these videos be without digressions? 94, searching for the Hotodogisu. I hope I got that right. It's basically a birding venture. Like she and the ladies go out trying to find this bird. Another just great example. And right after that one, I'll just read this one. It's short. Just a lovely little vignette. It was while we were in the office of the Empress's household, a brilliant moonlit night, close to the full moon, brilliantly moonlit night, close to the full moon of the 8th month. Ukan had been asked to play the biwa. Her Majesty was seated near the edge of the aisle. The other ladies were chatting and laughing, but I sat in silence, leaning against an aisle pillar. "Why so quiet?" inquired Her Majesty. "Say something. You're looking too forlorn." "I'm simply immersing myself in the spirit of the moonlight," I replied. "Beautifully put," remarked Her Majesty. And while in my mind, there's many times I could almost compare a little bit of what it's like to read Michel de Montaigne, his essays, where you really start to get to know the personality of this man by reading his essays, even his really short ones, and he includes parts of his personalities. I feel a lot that way with Sei Shonagon, but I think this episode really demonstrates the difference between like their personalities. Like Michel de Montaigne mentions how once, he might have been at a party. He was at parties with a bunch of ladies, and somebody might ask him what's wrong, and he says nothing, but he's actually thinking about somebody who just died from a fever, and that he could be next any day, and that his days are numbered. He's thinking about mortality at a party when you should just be relaxing and having fun. And here, Sei Shonagon, when the Empress asks what's wrong, she says, "I'm simply immersing myself in the spirit of the moonlight." Like, it's beautiful. It's lovely. It's almost more toward the Fernando Pessoa's Alberto Cairo, this just existing completely in a physical reality and just enjoying whatever small delights it can have. And there's actually something later I want to bring up about that. I hope this video is going to be long, but this book is worth a long video, honestly. And like I said, you only get your chance to get your first thoughts about a first reading out once. And so I'm not going in as much detail as I imagined, but yeah, this is in that sort of focus on these moments of delight and mundane beauty is what in the introduction this translator calls an okashi aesthetic. I'll have to turn to that to actually be able to reference it here. Oh yes, yeah, that Sei Shonagon was clearly intent on documenting the world through the lens of this okashi aesthetic, which I understand to be a kind of aesthetic response cultivated and owned, which delights itself by its awareness of the frisson of pleasure that an object or moment produces, and whose pleasure is compounded by the knowledge that it would be shared by others of a cultured sensibility. So Sei Shonagon was writing not only for, but in an important sense on behalf of her audience at court, as she noted, described, and discussed the myriad things that engaged her interest, and the okashi sensibility is the unifying theme behind her jumble of apparently random jottings. And this does get start to hint a little bit at, like, yeah, there is definitely an elitism to Sei Shonagon's writing. She writes looks down on the commoners many times throughout the book, but I mean it's really interesting too, because she isn't exactly, I mean, like the height of class and nobility, but there's a sort of insecurity almost that comes out, I feel, when she sort of writes about the commoners in this way. And she's not always rude about commoners, but she really doesn't. Yeah, there certainly is an elitism here, and she feels very proud to be part of this elite world, and kind of sort of like an there's an unapologeticness to an unapologetic attitude that she has about sort of her delight in it. And the sincerity is almost like, I appreciate it in this writing, because I would much rather have that than the hypocrisy, of someone who is acting to be, a champion of the people or something like that, while living in a cloistered world, or just saying like, "Oh, poor people," but then doing nothing about it. And she's never, I would say, she's never like spiteful in a way that's like wishing them harm or anything. It's like the people running toward the front of a temple irritate her, or sort of she doesn't like how they dress, or they're boring, sort of thing. It's never like spiteful, I want to say. But I don't know. She's not a perfect person. Authors are not ever perfect people, and that's not. I don't think we read for moral guidance. I don't find myself reading literature for moral guidance for the most part, but rather to realize I'm not alone, and I'm in good company, and that I don't think we should put these great writers on a pedestal. They're just human beings. They're just human beings. So 109, that is a countryside scene. And here's an example where actually I almost feel like she's admiring sort of the beauty of something. I don't know if these are commoners she's observing, but it kind of sounds like maybe. Around the end of the 4th month, we went on a pilgrimage to the temple at Hase. Our carriage was loaded onto a ferry at the famous Yodo crossing. We crossed the river. We noticed what looked like short stems of sweet flag and reeds growing in the water nearby. but when we had them picked, they turned out to be extremely long. It was fascinating to see boats loaded with reeds ferrying to and fro across the river. And then on their return, a light rain was falling, and there were men and children out in the water gathering sweet flag. The men wearing very small sedge rain hats, their clothes tucked up high above their long shanks. Just watching, laborers in the field and admiring them. Or there's another one where she's watching actually women going out with men on boats, and it's actually the women, the girls that are diving for stuff at the bottom of the river. I can't remember what they're diving for. Maybe pearls, or it might have been pearls. I don't know, but she's not always like this anti-village life sort of person, is what I'm trying to say. But she comes off as very forward at times. And so 115, the pilgrimage scene, is one of my favorites as well. A retreat at the temple, and here's where she talks about, these, the women, she's talking about these people shuffling in. This is one of the few times that she's actually mingling with commoners ever in her life, really. Her court life, I should say. I don't really know what was her life before and what will her life be after these I think 7 to 10 years, I want to say, in the court, or maybe it was less or more. The women are accompanied by children and by a group of young men who have the run of the temple inside out. Let's see. Some rude folk, heaven knows who, press up close to the ladies or try to push in front of them. Hold back there, they're told. That's no way to behave. There are ladies of quality present. But while the more sensitive will take the point and retreat, there are others who pay no notice and simply push in to be the first to reach the sacred image and worship there. Yeah, it's most unpleasant to have to pass in front of the rows of kneeling pilgrims as you make your way to your room, but that glimpse of the inner sanctum beyond the lattice screen has filled you with a feeling of reverence, and with your freshly kindled faith you wonder how you could have let such a long time pass before your pilgrimage here. She really has some powerful feelings of this pilgrimage is a real adventure in her life, and this is just a great chapter that I particularly liked. Then we get irritating things. We get embarrassing things. One of which starts out by saying the heart of a man is an embarrassing thing, and ends by saying how it's astonishing a man will fail to be in the slightest bit affected by the moving nature of a woman's deep unhappiness when he considers abandoning her. And she appears to be talking more about other people in this sense, but again, it's very difficult sometimes when she's talking about... I almost feel like when she talks about love and abandonment and relationships and her passions, which she claims to be rather detached, doesn't really let herself get too attached to any man emotionally, profoundly. At least it doesn't seem that way. She admires certain men and finds them attractive, but isn't could do without him or not. But it's hard to know when she's writing this in this indirect way about somebody else or something that she's actually experienced. And it's very, again, interesting to wonder about that. And then we get 134, when the pillow book had been discovered and read by others. And here is where you can really start to look into this meta-narrative of just this interesting meta-narrative of if it's been, how maybe her awareness of writing this changed. It's in the footnotes that this is the point where she starts making kind of specific comments, sort of defending herself. This is the first comment like it in the book. She writes in... And this is under the section Worthless Things, but she writes... So, I never intended this book to be seen by others, so I've written whatever came into my mind, without worrying about whether people would find it strange or unpleasant. And this is the first time that this is really, mentioned, the idea that others might see this. And so at this point is where we speculate that, other people have read her work and it's starting to circulate. And she did gain some sort of notoriety, obviously, for her writings in her lifetime, as, Lady Murasaki, who wrote The Tale of Genji, wrote in her diary I already mentioned. So it's it really just that you really enter this whole world of the Heian era when you read like The Tale of Genji in the Pillow Book, and I do look forward to The Tale of Genji actually. Though I think I have a feeling I'm always going to be a little bit more partial to Sei Shonagon. 136 difficult times. Yeah, this is one mention where this is actually a difficult time in her life. But even the things that happen during this chapter or this section it's just kind of a rather mundane conversation. But it makes me wonder, because this is during a difficult time where the Sei had to leave the palace. Where you wonder if maybe there's a little bit more to it. $144. Endearingly lovely things. Here, Sei kind of really, I find this to be one of the most life-affirming sections, because she writes about children and babies and kind of like she finds them endearing and lovely, and like things that children use when they play, like dolls, and she says here, in fact, absolutely anything that's tiny is endearing. She obviously, and I think there's another section that mentions this, she's really a fan of miniatures, and also talking about like birds and little white chicks running around with a mother hen. There's just, I don't know, I just found such a warm feeling I get with reading that part. The 145, she right after this, she tells us she does not like bratty children or parents who spoil them or let them get away with being, with throwing temper tantrums. So that was kind of interesting, and that's where I get where there does seem to be a sort of like thought to how some of these things are constructed, the order in which these are, but then other times it seems totally random, or a lot of lists will be together. There will be a bunch of like sort of anecdotes in a row, and then some lists, and then some other stuff like a story, and but it can be all over the place at times too. So we get terrifying things. 151. I really like this one. People who seem enviable. And it's different things. Like here's one. There's a whole list. There's a whole bunch of them here. I thoroughly envy anyone, man, woman, or priest, who has fine children. Also people with lovely, long, smooth hair with beautiful ends. So this is almost the one hint maybe we get at Sei Shonagon's appearance. Not that it's, I guess, particularly important, but interesting that I guess she does not consider herself to have, lovely, long, smooth hair with beautiful ends. And she also says, I very much envy great people when I see how everyone reveres them and attends to their every need, and people who write in a beautiful hand and are good at poetry, who are called on for every occasion. So it's and I think there's sort of this, I mean, she considers herself a poet, and she comes from, I guess, a family of poets, but this is such an interesting part to me, because I think it's important to like be honest about what you envy, and to be honest and sincere, and even when it seems like insensitive, callous, or elitist, like Sei is just really, her honesty is really charming and refreshing. So I really can't emphasize that point enough. we're all just fallible, confused, short-lived people, and we all have the power to write beauty into this difficult world. So, 154, Tadonabu appears again. They kind of flirt over a game of Go that I found interesting. That game of Go. We get more lists. Another mention to a love of miniatures. A lot of the best stuff, honestly, is in sort of this last. I don't know, these sort of last 80 sections or so. Actually, it's more than that, like 100 sections. I would say like the last 2/3 of the book. A lot of the best stuff is in there, to me. And yeah, more condescension toward the priests. There's just you really, as you start to get an idea of her personality, you also start to appreciate the nuances of it more, and the times that she does sort of take a different perspective on things as well. It's delightful to see someone who's a great ladies' man. There's another one where it seems like she is writing in number 186 as well, where she writes, "It's very unseemly for a man who's visiting a gentle woman to eat while with her." So another one where it's like, yeah, is this something she's experienced, or that another one of her ladies, her lady friends that she knows in court has experienced? We don't really know, but it's still a very good insight into life regardless. And number 185, also paired with another one that's going to come later, let's see, number 243, these two about how she cannot stand the bad use of language. Like here it's obviously anglicized, to say, like, when people say gonna instead of going to, right? That's obviously sort of just to give the effect of what she's saying. Or in this later one, how she can't stand people who write poorly. Unless, of course, and this is a case where she says, like, if a commoner speaks poorly to someone who's above them, it's funny because it's to be expected. They're a commoner, right? But it's like if there's somebody who should know better speaking to somebody that's above them and they write or speak poorly, like that is just ugh. And Sei Shonagon also says she corrects people. She corrects them when she speaks wrong, or when they speak wrong, or write wrong, and she recognizes that this may make her come off as rude, and maybe that's why some people don't like her. It's very another kind of self-reflective moment, but unapologetic, really. Unapologetic. 190 to 203, a really interesting list. 232 to 241 as well. Really interesting lists and vignettes. Number 220, we get a little bit more of that elitist side coming out, where she's talking about trying to wrangle her carriage up to have a better view of some festival events that are happening. And she ends that one by saying, like, she can't stand those people that are in a fine, beautiful carriage, but then call up some random nobody, like a commoner or somebody, like somebody who's just a nobody, to come up and get a better view with them. Like, yeah, she thinks that, the elitists should have standards and sort of be like, if you're going to present yourself with this big, beautiful carriage and be in the elites, then you shouldn't be stooping down to watch some fun things with the people below you, or something to that effect. It's definitely an aspect that comes out again. It's 226. We get fascinating riddles. This story about riddles, where a captain helps a Japanese emperor solve a riddle, which saves them from being, like, invaded by China or something. Like, the Emperor of China is basically thinking about taking over Japan, but since this Japanese emperor can solve this riddle about a log, it basically the Chinese emperor learns to respect Japan. So that was just a random interesting story, and actually is featured in the very first part of that BBC audio series that I'm listening to, that takes a lot of liberties but is good. So let's see. 248, 249. There's a bunch of them I wrote down, I'm sure, for different reasons. There's just so many good ones. I mean, you could go on and on about this book. Oh, 248 is great because, again, this is right after she's kind of meditated on, maybe there's some reasons why people don't like me. I can be a bit like, yeah, I can come off a bit rude, but it's like, she writes, being disliked by others is really a most distressing thing. How crazy would you have to be to accept calmly the fact that you're probably the sort of person nobody likes? Yeah, I don't know. Interesting reflection there. Kind of goes off in a different direction, though. Men have the most peculiar and unlikely feelings. And then nothing is more wonderful than sympathy. And I really like this one. And it says, in a man, of course, but also in a woman. It may be only some passing remark. It may not be anything particularly deeply felt, but to hear that someone has said of a sad situation, how sad for her, or of some touching circumstance, I do wonder how she must be feeling, makes you much gladder than hearing it said directly face to face. I always long to find a way to let such a person know that I've learned of their sympathetic response. I don't know if I've ever heard that articulated in that way before, that like you hear that somebody else expressed concern about you to somebody else, like he asked about you or she asked about you, or said like, felt really bad for what you're going through, and it's like, yeah, you kind of feel like, it's nice, and but it's sort of this like, you never really let that person know you appreciated that. And there's a lot of things in life like that where these subtleties where it's like somebody might have done something for you in your life, and you never will be able to let them know how much that meant to you. Like, I can remember something someone told me once about, it's like how they really saw some sort of potential in me if I could find my platform to speak, right? And it's something that's always stayed with me, that like this person believed that I could do something great, or whatever. So it's that sort of thing. Yeah, you don't feel particularly surprised and moved, of course, in the case of someone who you can rely on to feel for you or visit you at such times. But if someone unexpected responds to the tale of your sorrows with reassuring words, it fills you with pleasure. It's such a simple thing to do, yet so rare. And then finally, it's unusual to find someone, either man or woman, who's overall both tender-hearted and truly talented, though actually there must be many such people around. Yeah. That's interesting. Rare to find both a tender-hearted and truly talented person. But then she says, though, maybe it's not so rare. There must be lots of those people, Wow. That's a really stunning passage to me. 257. We're almost at the end here of at least going through my favorites. Things that give you pleasure. You've read the first volume of a tale you hadn't come across before and are longing to go on with it. And then you find the other volume. And it's this whole chapter of things like this. Just small delights in life, 258 is kind of the origin of it. Actually, this is really interesting because it starts with Sei confessing to the Empress that she feels some days that she would be better off dead. Like, Sei kind of reveals like that she has sort of a depressive aspect to her personality. But then she says, when she's longing to just disappear, just to die, she comes on a piece of white paper and a good writing brush and some nicely decorated paper, and is immediately cheered and finds herself thinking, I might perhaps be able to go on living a while longer. And She says, "I'm overcome with the feeling that life itself is just too wonderful and I really couldn't bear to relinquish it just yet." "The simplest trifles console you, don't they?" remarked Her Majesty with a smile. And then later the Empress sends her a stack of beautiful paper, and Sei Shonagon thinks, "I am going to make a book of this." And it's not said explicitly, but in the footnotes it says this may actually be the origin of the putting together of the pillow book, as a book to be circulated, I think is the intention of what it's saying here, because at the end there's another story of the actual origin where there was just a bunch of papers that the Empress basically said, "Here, take them," and she starts writing on them, or it's something to that effect. I'd have to read it again, but yeah. So 259, actually, I wasn't done talking about that last one. This idea that so you might think like, oh yeah, well this is a woman who lives, in this sort of this life I'm reading about is just upper class, sheltered, everything's taken care of. It's not a hard life at all. But I think if we look a little closer, there were a lot of hard times. They were passing away, a loss of security for Sei Shonagon at many parts in her life, especially being being a woman who's not married or anything like that. It's just sort of like she did go through some hard times in her life, but it's always important to remember reading this book that she has intentionally constructed a book to focus on the beautiful things in life. And I think this number 258 is such a beautiful part because it reveals that, and there's a few other moments in the book that I really appreciate, that there are hard times going on underneath this. There are difficult things happening in these people's lives. Both things are, it's kind of like, like the book I had to read in high school. Was it The Outsiders? You had the greasers and the socias or whatever. It's like things are rough all over was basically the message, right? Like, doesn't matter if you're from the upper class or the lower class. Like, we all go through hard times at some point, sort of thing. But yeah, it's just speculating. So 259 is the longest story, I believe, in this entire book. And it is so mundane. I found it so boring the first time I read it. But then the last line, Sei Shonagon writes, "But these events, which seem to us so splendid and auspicious at the time, all look very different when compared with the present. And this is why I've set it all down in detail, with a heavy heart." So this is something, Sei Shonagon wrote this story that I found really boring the first time reading it, like one of the most boring in the whole book and overlong. And she's just dwelling in it. This simple time of ceremonies. It's just ceremonies at the palace. And I'm finding it boring, but she is dwelling in it because she's going through a really hard time, and she's trying to just dwell in a time that things were better, and it says that even she was writing it with a heavy heart. Like, wow, that comes through. It comes through. 273, get Captain Narinobu, which is another man she kind of admires, and I wonder if was not a lover of hers, because immediately after that we get one that's called "You Have a Lover Who Always sends a next morning poem," who one morning kind of once again complaining about how these poems are written or so on. But it's just kind of like, is this about that guy that she just wrote about in the last section? You kind of wonder, that sort of thing. So, yeah, there's not too much more here. I think I can wrap it up with Yeah, 294 is kind of just this incomplete story, kind of out of nowhere. That was kind of an outlier. But yeah, then so we get the official end of the Sankenbon text, but we also get some supplementary notes. So these are just kind of additional things, but the final the final vignette of it is the sort of origin story of how it was the story of how the book was actually discovered, is what it says. Okay, I have to reference that again, but that kind of seems important. But before that, I want to share my favorite of these 29 supplemental passages. A place with a pond, in the 5th month when the rains are falling, is a very moving thing. It's deeply affecting to sit for hours on end staring out at the garden, a sea of monochrome, soft green with the pond's water as deep green as the sweet flag and reeds that crowd it, and the heavy rain clouds hanging above. Indeed, all places with ponds are at all times moving and delightful. And of course this is so too on winter mornings when the water is frozen over. Rather than a carefully tended pond, I find delightful the sort that have been left neglected to the rampant water weed, where patches of reflected moonlight gleam whitely on the water here and there between the swaths of green. All moonlight is moving, wherever it may be. Once again, just the beauty in the moonlight, as was in another passage I read earlier, but I love that. All moonlight is moving, wherever it may be. I just really like that line. And yeah, this is, supplement 29, how she writes, I have written in this book things I've seen and thought in the long idle hours spent at home without ever dreaming that others would see it. Fearing that some of my foolish remarks could well strike others as excessive and objectionable, I did my best to keep it secret, but despite all my intentions, I'm afraid it has come to light. We have to wonder a little bit if Sei Shonagon didn't take some pleasure in having her thoughts accidentally revealed to the world. I don't know. I could see it, Yeah, and so she writes, Palace Minister Korichika one day presented to the Empress a bundle of paper. What do you think we could write on this? Her Majesty inquired. They are copying records of the historian over at His Majesty's court. This should be a pillow then, I suggested. Sei Shonagon suggested. Very well, it's yours, declared Her Majesty, and she handed it over to me. So just by Sei Shonagon saying that this should just be a pillow instead of being written for anything, is I think it's also a play on words or something in the footnote, but or the end note. But yeah, that's how she got this pile of paper to work with and just started writing things down. But I think that pack of nice paper, I like to think that pack of nice paper she received from the Empress in that other story was something that happened obviously later, and that was sort of like an acknowledgement of the Empress saying, I like what you're doing. Keep it up. I believe in you. I love you. It's so nice. It's so nice. This is such a long video. I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it to be this long. And I'm sure I could have done a better job, but I'll just show some of the stuff I'm going to be reading next. I already showed the Tale of Genji. I wanted to show this Japan, a history and art, which is actually printed in Japan. It's this massive book, and showing these full art, statues and I guess ceramics or paintings and different things. I wanted to go to the Heian era, because that's sort of what Pillow Book is in. And even here, the first novel, it mentions here Lady Murasaki Shikibu, The Tale of Genji. And oh, right there, a few years earlier, the Pillow Book had been written by Sei Shonagon, another court lady of intelligence and wit. It was a series of impressions of the small pleasures enjoyed by people of educated tastes, the feel of a heavy silk cloth, a rustle of autumn leaves, the color of dying flowers. Her book was gay, filled with what the Japanese called okashi, a smile suddenly expressed and quickly gone. And it says both books, referring to The Tale of Genji and The Pillow Book, tend to show how deeply refinement and awareness of beauty had entered Japanese life. These qualities spread from the aristocracy to the warrior class. Many soldiers were known for the excellence of their poetry and eventually became the heritage of the nation. Yeah, and really, I cannot think, please correct me if there are others, but I cannot think of a single other modern nation state or country or empire or anything throughout history where the basis of literature was laid by women. Really, Japan seems to me to be exceptional in this regard, though I suppose you could argue that in some cultures the oral tradition has been sustained by women, and that in some way is sort of the literature, particularly in some African countries, maybe. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thing, I guess, I wanted to throw out there and explore. But yeah, since this video is already so long, I'll just let you guys know that I am planning to do a lot more reading of women from history in the coming months. It is kind of I guess it's come up in conversations recently, and I just kind of realized, like, yeah, this is a really important perspective that I feel I want to get from literature. And so I've got here the Alexiad of Anna Komnena. I don't know how many of these are going to be appearing in videos, or if some of them are going to appear in the same video together. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm sure some of these will appear in some fashion, at least. So we've got the Lays of Marie de France, got Christine de Pizan, Treasure of the City of Ladies, Marguerite de Navarre, the Heptameron. And then I thought, well, let's get some modern stuff in here too. I wanted to read the final posthumously published A Breath of Life by Clarice Lispector, and Alice Munro's selected stories I wanted to try to get into a little bit as well. And then also I have Carolina Maria de Jesus. I didn't pronounce that the right Portuguese way, I don't believe. But a Brazilian woman who wrote her memoirs of living in the slums or the favelas in the 1960s, I believe, in Brazil, or perhaps a little earlier, but it was published, I think, in 1960, or it might be about that time, I can't remember. But that was an important one I wanted to add to this list because I had read a little bit of it in university for a class and thought it was really good and always meant to get it, but now it's finally on its way. And I think it's important too. It's so hard, especially, I want to say, like, it's kind of uncomfortable to say, but especially with trying to read female authors from the past, especially, is trying to get class representation. Like, I don't want to just read the upper classes, right? I also want, I want to get perspectives and windows into other ways of life too. So I feel like Carolina Maria de Jesus, or however you pronounce that in Brazilian Portuguese, is kind of where I want to start with trying to find that kind of thing in whatever way I can. So yeah, that is my video on the Pillow Book. Over long and probably much more than necessary, and but really in the spirit of this channel and these 1001 Nights of Reading the World, and I feel worth, to me, every minute of it. So take care. We'll see you next time. Have a good night, day, whatever.